With us this morning is Josh Jacobsen, Dwayne Allen, Kelley Aubey, and Osso. And we're trying to navigate through this very difficult situation that restaurants are having to go through. And Dwayne was talking about the SBA loan within the CARES Act. That's the federal stimulus package that was just recently passed. And Josh and Dwayne have gone through that filing process with some of the components of the SBA loans. But they're waiting, in Josh's case, the payment protection. I'm sorry, what is it called again, Josh?
The Payroll Protection Program, the PPP.
Okay, all right. So you're waiting on that one. Dwayne is. Have you gotten your? Are you still waiting on that $10,000 loan?
Yes, we've applied. Well, we've applied for the disaster relief, but we've also applied for the payroll protection stimulus. Even with not knowing, how that relates to us as a criteria. We've put our names in the hat. We haven't heard anything yet. We've submitted everything that the banks asked for, our payroll information and such like that. So we're all in this holding pattern. And I'm trying to get, our landlord to understand that, sure, because landlords are telling us the same thing. Well, the government has this money for you in the form of relief through the PPP and the EIDL. But we don't have that money, and we're getting the standard notices you would imagine a landlord will send to a tenant that hasn't paid their rent. Luckily, the Arizona Small Restaurant Coalition, we championed getting a prohibition on eviction, and the wonderful thing about that is that that at least buys small business operators time to hopefully work through this process. But even that order is only in place until May 31st. And so one of the key things that has to be addressed by the governor and the legislature is what happens June 1st? Are we going to expect small business operators to have 3 months of rent on June 1st? That's not practical. That's absolutely not practical. And if that's how we're going to go through this process, we can expect to have a significant amount of boarded up storefronts across the state. And then where will we be?
So, I'm sorry, go ahead. Was that Gio or was it?
Yeah.
Gio?
I was
go ahead,
just going to say, Dwayne, you hit it right on the head too. I mean, how long does this standoff on eviction happen? And then the second that they lift these mandates and we go back to business, are they going to expect all that money that's owed to them? And are the evictions going to start happening at that point? That's a scary thought in itself.
Right.
So you're talking about the governor's executive order to halt evictions for small businesses and nonprofits, and that I think his executive order lasts until May 31. I don't want to speak out of turn. A lot of this I think depends on how long this crisis lasts, how long this shutdown lasts, right? And so my presumption would be, and again, I may be speaking out of turn, my presumption would be that the governor looks at that depending on where we're at in May, for example. But let me hone in on that a little bit. Has any one of you actually taken advantage of that? Talk to your landowner, your landlord, and said, I think the order allows for the tenant and the landlord to try and find some sort of solution, right? But the end goal is not to evict the tenant. I wonder if any one of you has gone through that with their landowner.
I know I have. The funny thing about that is that, we were able to get a rent break, and that I guess is nice of the landlord to do that. But it's the frustrating thing is that in this whole conversation here, what it feels like to me is that the burden of figuring a lot of this out and somehow helping the landlords through this and helping the rest of our debtors through this, we've got to pay everybody. It really just it kind of feels like everything's falling on our shoulders. This whole mess that's at least in the early phases of whatever's going on with the financial impacts of this virus. It's like we're the ones that are supposed to somehow hold it together. And it's like, my landlord, she gets a check from me. Other than that, she doesn't really do much, and she's telling me, yeah, well, I've got bills to pay. And I'm like, yeah, you think, you've got bills to pay? And, I don't understand why. Dwayne has said this before when we've spoken, that if we're not making money, why does anybody else merit making money themselves? We should all be referring to it earlier on last week before as a pause. And why, this whole conversation we're having is like, well, how are we going to get money? How are we going to get money? How are we going to keep the doors open? The reason we're in this situation to begin with is we have a bunch of people with their hands out that we have to pay that have not been told sufficiently that they need to back off. And so we're the ones that are facing this problem, and I don't think that my landlord, to be honest with you, deserves any more money than I'm making, which I'm making none.
So Kelley, let me ask you, when you say a rent break, what does that mean? Is that like you don't have to pay 2 months of break or rent, but then you have to pay that at the end, or?
Yeah, exactly. It's a rent break as far as it's about 50% of what I normally pay. Fortunately for this month, I can pay it. If the PPP comes through, then that'll get me a little bit further along maybe. But in the end, obviously, a business lease, some people may not know this, but business leases aren't quite as nice as leases when you like rent an apartment or whatever. We're on the hook for the total amount of the entire rent. So it's not like if we break rent, we don't just lose our first and last month's rent deposit, and so whatever we owe, coming out of the end of this, we're going to legally have to pay that back at some point, and unfortunately, go ahead. I'm
sorry, go ahead, Kelley, finish that sentence.
Yeah, well, whatever I end up falling short on what I'm going to be paying if I'm lucky enough to reopen, I'm going to have to pay that back. And there's the governor said that he's, recommends to landlords to not charge interest and recommends to work something out and all that. But if there's no rules to how they can work it out, they can still say, well, if you don't pay me back, once we reopen, if you don't pay me back that entire amount within 3 months or whatever, or immediately, then we can go after you. So it sort of feels like an empty platitude on the governor's part that we need something that is a real thing to keep the landlords at bay, because what I'm seeing right now is that the landlords aren't exactly being very nice about this. It's like the whole community seems to understand that we're all in this mess together. And it just, from my perspective, and it could just be this little small perspective that I have, but a lot of other business owners that I've spoken with, and myself included, the landlords just seem like, yeah, you got to pay me. And they're not being very nice about it. And I don't think they're not empathetic. They don't seem to view it as we're all in this together. Just the sampling that I've spoken.
What about?
If I
sorry, go ahead, Dwayne. Go ahead,
just
Dwayne.
follow up on that. I think the fact that we're all in this together is really starting to ring hollow. There are, we're hearing this from politicians and leaders, in different arenas. But the truth of the matter here is, bars and restaurants were the canaries in the coal mine. We were the first ones to be affected, right? And in a very drastic way. One day my business is thriving, and then I literally show up the next day and it's gone, right? So when we talk about we're all in this together, if my business is shut down, I have no revenues coming in, and that to some extent is based on government action, right? The government actually ordered us to shut down. So it doesn't make sense to me that the government can take such a step, but then is tepid when it comes to the obligations upstream. It's very tepid when it comes to landlord. And I know, this is Arizona. It's a very conservative state, and so property rights and all that seems to really hold a significant space in the psyche, and I get that. But these are extraordinary times. And if the government is issuing orders to shut businesses down, then the effects of that should really carry all the way upstream. Landlords can't expect to get rent from a business that's been ordered to close by the government. Banks can't expect to get payments on financial obligations from a business or a property owner whose property is subject to a closure order by the government. So if we're really all in this together, everybody's got to step up and feel the pinch. The full burden of this shutdown cannot rest squarely and only on the shoulders of small business operators. And like Kelley said, that's what I'm feeling, and I will tell you that that's what a lot of small business operators around the state are feeling. People are telling us to go borrow money to continue to pay these financial obligations. How is it the landlords expect to remain whole, banks expect to remain whole? That's absolutely not the way that we're going to survive this crisis. That's setting us up to really just complicate things in a much more disastrous way as we move forward.
So,
Luigi, could I jump in on a
yeah,
couple
go ahead,
of points
Josh.
there, if you mind?
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the board of the Arizona Restaurant Association. And, part of the reason I do that is to hopefully try to be a resource to the other restaurateurs in my community. And I can feel just, the anguish that we all are dealing with right now in terms of everything just kind of hanging above us and the uncertainty. So let me give you a couple of things that the ARA is actually working on behind the scenes that, if any of the gentlemen on here would like to get more information or support the ARA, that'd be fantastic. But behind the scenes, we're trying to tell the government that the PPP, the way that they have the breakdown structured, that 25% of it can be used for non-payroll items, that is not enough, that we need to have that be extended. Beyond that, if you file for PPP, I believe you're not able to get the other parts of the CARE loans. You're precluded from getting some of those. We need a more all-inclusive package to be able to have access to all of those items. Beyond that, we are working with the governor to extend TPT payments by 90 days. So far, he hasn't been very receptive. And so, the coalitions that you guys are a part of, if we can unite and get more information to the governor on how important that is to us, that would be helpful. We are also looking at, this is probably the biggest thing that can help all of us. We are advocating heavily on getting the insurance companies involved to actually pony up for the business interruption insurance. And I'm sure that you guys have been following all the litigation that's starting to pop up around the country, but that's something that could really start to, make us look like we could be whole at the end of this. If we had a look back period in a way that, hey, we've all been paying those premiums. I know you guys love writing those checks every week, or rather every month, but we've been paying to be covered for this type of thing, and they do need to help us out. And then finally, I'd like to say, as far as the landlords go, that is actually something that needs to come from the federal level, and we're trying to get Congress to put up a solution to help restaurants and landlords out. There would be a giant ripple effect, as you guys have mentioned. If there's no money, how can you pay your bills? And just to give you an idea of how big the restaurant industry is in Arizona, we account for $14.7 billion in sales. There's 10,281 eating and drinking restaurant establishments in Arizona, and we employ about 11% of the workforce. So, we, like you guys mentioned, the government effectively told us that we had to shut down for the good of our community, and we were all willing to do that, except for it really hasn't been a level playing field. And if we look at things pragmatically, I think that's something that, personally, it is pretty upsetting to me that we have been the industry that has been singled out to be shut down. And when, restaurateurs, I know that all of you are there for the community. Anytime somebody needs something, we are there. We are the employers. We've got jobs now for our people. As the unemployment is going up to 10% around the country, once we finally get opened back up, we are going to be one of the first places that people come and look for employment again, look for that paycheck to support their family. So there's a very vested interest for us to be taken care of.
So thanks for that, Josh. I want to just list a couple of the things that the governor has done specifically to help out small businesses, and I guess specifically to try and help out the restaurants, right? He's issued a couple executive orders in the last several days, in the last several weeks. Among them is allowing Arizona restaurants to repackage and sell grocery items that they have on hand, including items not normally packaged and labeled for resale. He has deferred the payment of liquor licensing fees by 90 days. I guess Josh, you mentioned you wanted to extend to defer payments of sales taxes by 90 days as well.
Correct.
but the governor has deferred payment of liquor licensing fees by 90 days. Of course, we talked about the order to halt evictions, right, until May 31st. So let me ask you about the allowing Arizona restaurants to repackage and sell grocery items that they have on hand. Has that been an option for you? And I guess the larger question, I don't think it's going to work for Kelley here. He's not, he's not a dine out or a place. But I guess the other part of that question is there are restaurants that are doing like just takeouts, just like dine outs, right? I don't think that's and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that's a sustainable model by any stretch of the imagination. There are some restaurants that are doing that. But let me ask, like Gio, for example, what do you think of that executive order to allow restaurants to kind of repackage and sell grocery items that you have? Would that help?
I'm not a grocery store, so not really, because people are going to go to their grocery store. They're going to go to, if I could use names, so they're going to go to Bash's, they're going to go to Albertsons, they're going to go to Target, they're going to go to Walmart, they're going to go to those places. They're not going to associate, my restaurant with a grocery store. So I don't see how that's going to really help anything or help anyone help anyone significantly. Certain restaurants that are doing it might be seeing, an increase in sales if they were just doing to go, but I don't think it's going to really make a significant impact on their business model in order to sustain the business. I don't think that's going to happen. To just backtrack a little bit about everything, let's put the scenario in place for 1 second here. Back in February, business was booming. Everything was great. You're heading into March. March is our busiest month of the year. It's spring training, the height of spring training. It's when everyone is here. Everything's crazy. So now all our restaurant people are buying more glassware. They're buying more, more silverware. They're buying more product. They're buying all this stuff. Okay. We have all this money laid out there in order to execute for the busiest months of the year. That's going to carry us through the slowest months of the year. And then it comes to a screeching halt. All that money we owe, where's that going to come from? This little PPP thing, I don't think it's going to do much for many restaurants. Any other kinds of loans. So now you have restaurants that have been out of debt, now have to go back into debt to pay back these loans. That's going to be very tragic for some restaurants because they're not going to be able to come back from this. So this is a scary landscape for the restaurant industry.
The governor, as I mentioned, also deferred payment of liquor licensing fees for 90 days. I'm presuming that's a direct help to you, right? I mean, that is more concrete, correct?
Listen, that liquor license, if I may, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead. No, please.
Liquor license is the lowest hanging fruit out there, right? And the fact that we had to really yell and scream from the top of our lungs to get the governor to move on this. It is of no benefit to operators like myself and like Gio who's closed down. So, I mean, clearly it's good. And I'm sure somebody's realizing some benefits from it. There are restaurateurs who are out there and able to take advantage of that. That's great. But that's the least of what is in the governor's authority to address this problem right here.
So what I'm seeing right now is we have the governor. If I'm going to step back, and again, I'm not in your shoes. I'm not running a restaurant. I'm not shut down. My newspaper is considered an essential service, for example, in the governor's executive order. So I'm not shut down. I am working from home and trying to homeschool full time and then work full time. So I'm kind of in the same boat as most people. But if I were to step back a little bit, so here's what I see. We have the federal government with a federal stimulus package with loans, all kinds of loans, different kinds of loans that small businesses such as yourself can take advantage of. Governor has issued a couple executive orders specifically to help out the restaurants, halting evictions, for example, deferring liquor licensing fees, pointing to the commitment that he had gotten from the banks about loans, for example. I know Josh behind the scenes working to try and get deferred payments for sales taxes, for example. So we have these several avenues for the restaurants and, quite frankly, for small business owners to take advantage of. What I'm really hearing from you is it's not enough. And so let me ask Josh, am I all these efforts that we're seeing right now, it's not enough. So let me ask you, what in addition to all of those, what can the feds help the restaurants with? What can the state government help?
Well, I think that the biggest help would be getting the business interruption insurance to kick in. You know, that way we can really look at what kind of business we should have been doing at this time of year. And the insurance companies can make us whole so that we can, like Gio was saying, you know, the summers in Arizona are brutal. You know, I mean, in Tucson, we've got more tumbleweeds blowing on the roads than we do customers 'cause it's so hot and everybody leaves. And when it's so hot, that also leads to all of our equipment breaking. And so not only is business slow, you have a tremendous amount of maintenance to take care of just due to the heat. So we really, really need to be able to save up all of our pennies during this time of year to make it through the tough times in the summer. So I think that we need the business interruption insurance to kick in. We need the PPP to be opened up so that that money can be used for, you know, different percentages of bills that you need. And then as far as having access to the rest of the care package, that should be a comprehensive package as well that couples with everything else.
So I'm sorry, Josh, you mentioned the business insurance. Tell us a little bit about it. What is it exactly, and what can you get?
Sure. So we all pay for business interruption insurance on our commercial business packages.
Business interruption insurance. Okay, thank you.
Business interruption insurance. That's correct. So, you know, if you have anything, you know, any sort of catastrophe, from a fire to, you know, a big robbery, or, you know, in my case, I've had a car go through the lobby of one of our restaurants. So we had to shut down and rebuild from that. And so
wow.
The reason you have that insurance is so that you can turn in all of your information about what kind of business you should have been doing. And then the insurance company, after you pay your deductible, and assuming that you're current on your premium, which I'm sure we all were, you know, because they sure like to send you letters when it's time to pay, but as far as paying you out, that's a little bit slower of a process. But really,
would something like this qualify? You know, there's a government dicta for restaurant to shut down.
Sure.
Yeah.
So part of the issue is, this is the gray area, and I believe it started. I might be wrong, but I believe it started with SARS. The insurance industry saw that and saw that down the line that could be a potential issue, so they put in a pandemic clause.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
The difference is, and this is where what I believe that the lawsuits are coming from, is that, well, you know, it's not the pandemic that shut us down, it's the government that shut us down. You know, you don't see a lot of retail places are open. I mean, I go to my big box stores and they're booming with business. You just drive down the street and it feels like the restaurant industry has been singled out, shut down, and made to do business in a way that, you know, if you've got a restaurant that's not built for takeout, you're not going to make it in this area. The numbers just don't add up.
So let me ask about the takeout option. I know some restaurants, as I mentioned, have transitioned into takeouts, and I think I'm correct in saying that's not really a sustainable model, especially if you're not built for takeout. But Gio and Dwayne, have you considered those options?
I have considered those options, but you know, my first restaurant, Virtu Honest Craft, it's not that type of model to do takeout. Now, the pizzeria, on the other hand, is a takeout style model, but I was only open 5 weeks before this happened. So no one even knows that I have a pizzeria yet, because it wasn't really made public in a sense. But most importantly for me is, you know, I mean, it hits a little closer to home, is that I just can't risk being exposed to anything, because I have a 4-year-old daughter that has asthma at home. And the last thing I need to do is be exposed to it, get it myself, and bring it home to her. That's not an option for me. I just can't do that.
I'm in the same boat as you are, Gio. I have a 79-year-old. My mom is 79 years old. She lives with us, so I can't really risk going outside, and, you know, she's in that risk pool at, you know, very serious complications if you know, she's hit by it. Dwayne, you're completely shut down, right? So no, that's not an option for you.
Right, that was never an option. You know, it was never part of our model. In the 12 years we've been open, we've, you know, I think we did we attempted to do takeout for the first 6 months back in 2008. So it's not something that we could do. You know, we're hearing from restaurateurs across the state who are part of the Arizona Small Restaurant Coalition. And the numbers are all over the place. I mean, we're hearing people experiencing revenue drops as much as 95%, even while they're trying to do their takeout. So I'm sure in some instances it may seem like it's an option, but it's really woefully inadequate. You know, people are trying to hang on to what's left of their business. And what's needed is a much more aggressive response from our elected official to alleviate the pressure from banks on landlords and to some extent the Department of Revenue with TPT. But to Josh's point, you know, we filed a claim with our insurance company almost 3 weeks ago. And as much as we filed a claim, really boils down to, you know, dialing a number and saying, hey, we're shut down because of this reason. The government ordered us to shut down. And they said, okay, we'll get back to you. It's been 3 weeks. We haven't heard anything, right? So that's really what needs to happen. We need action at the highest level of government. We can't simply expect for us to, you know, for restaurants and other small businesses to constantly be asking our customer base for, you know, to buy gift cards and all these other creative things and come out and do takeout when the risk of infection is still so high. We've yet to reach the peak of this thing. So essentially, we're putting the burden squarely on the shoulders of small business operators, you know, trying to be creative in responding to this while our elected officials aren't really at the table in any meaningful way. And I think that's what's got to happen. You know, the banks have their hands out, landlords got their hands out, insurance companies are dodging their obligation. The Department of Revenue still has its hands out. There's no way we're going to survive this crisis if that remains the same.
Yeah, and actually in that environment that you just laid out, Dwayne, then you have the restaurateur or the business owner, which is, you know, again, to reiterate that point, everybody's asking us for the money, and it needs to be spread out. The responsibility for pulling all of us through this financially needs to be spread out. Everybody's going to have to take some sort of hit, and it's an almost, if that environment doesn't change, it's going to be impossible to survive.
We are almost out of time, so I do want to take a moment at this point to thank our audience, everybody who's listening in via Zoom or calling in via phone. Thank you for spending your morning with us. I hope you got something out of this conversation. And I want to thank our sponsors again, Creosote Partners and Opportunity Arizona, for engaging with us in this way. I want to ask you something before we go. I want to ask you to tell us one good thing that's happened this week, that's happened today, or last night, for example. I can tell you, you know, the one good thing for me is that I get to spend every day with my kid, and he's having a real difficulty just concentrating. And but you know, we're working through that, and we have side projects like, you know, building a sailboat, building some propellers, and so I'm really thankful for that. Let me begin with Josh.
Well, I would like to actually back up and make a prediction for the way that I hope it's going to go when we finally are able to open back up. And this is easy for me to say since I'm actually still open and I'm seeing customers on a daily basis. But I can tell you that people come to my restaurant because we serve good comfort food, it's convenient, and it's inexpensive. People go to a lot of, you know, like all of you gentlemen, they go to your restaurants because the food is amazing, but also the environment is just fantastic. And I'm hoping that once we reopen, people are going to be so sick and tired of eating at home on their couch. They are going to flood you guys, and we're going to have a busy summer, and people are going to be so happy to go back to the places that they miss so much. And that's what I really look forward to when we are finally able to get to the other side of this. Thanks for having me on, Luigi.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Dwayne?
You know, I think the silver lining here is that people are realizing that talk is cheap, and are demanding that, you know, words that we're accustomed to hearing from elected officials be mobilized in the action, right? if they say they support and they recognize that small businesses are the backbone of Arizona's economy, they need to act like it, right? Politicians don't get to say that publicly to tell and then turn around and tell business owners that they need to go borrow money in order to survive this pandemic. We're all in this together, and we look around the state. We see distilleries that are making the switch to producing hand sanitizers. Right, we see countless ways, restaurants that have converted their kitchens into essentially food pantries to give away food to people who don't have food to eat. So I think that the good thing that's coming out of this is that we're seeing this rallying around the idea of community in a very big and meaningful way. But as we've said before, the responsibility of surviving this pandemic cannot rest squarely and only on the shoulders of the small business operators who are at the forefront and are taking the brunt of the force of this pandemic so far. It has to be across the board. Everybody needs to come to the table. The banks were flushed with cash going into this. They can't afford to take a haircut. We can, and it's a reasonable thing to ask banks to forgive mortgage payments that they're putting the squeeze on landlords for. In the same way, we're saying if the banks are forgiving mortgage payments, then landlords should be forgiving rent payments in the same way. We're all in this together, and people keep saying that, but I gotta tell you, the folks who have been living that have been the folks who have been most impacted by this, and the rest of society needs to step up.
Kelley?
To get
any good things or any silver lining?
The simple thing is that the fact that we're having this conversation now, there's a lot of people that are talking in a more direct manner. I see a lot of support from business to business, and there's sort of a feeling of camaraderie in that, and that's really great. And I'm getting to catch up late night anyway. I get to stay up and catch up on some of the films that we show here, because I've famously told people, when they come in here to see a film, I always tell people I've only ever seen 2 films here beginning to end because I'm too busy running the place. And so I'm getting a chance now, at least at home, to catch up on a lot of the films that we've shown.
That's awesome. Gio?
I think for me, the what Dwayne said is spot on. This is not a political thing. This is a people thing. This is about people and their businesses and their workforce out there. And that's what it's really, really about. And people need to step up and take care of other people. And that's the bottom line. But for me, the positive side to things is actually I'm getting to spend some more time with my children at home. I'm actually having a hand in helping potty train my 2-year-old, which is kind of fun, which I didn't get to do with my other 2 because I was always working. But that's the positive side. But I'm itching to get back to work, and I really want to do what I do best and what I love to do, which is cook. So that's a tough thing to sit back and not really do it for other people.
Gio, let's hope we get through this before there's a run on diapers, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
My personal hope is that for each of you, you persevere, you get through this one, you come out stronger than ever, you get to hire all your workers that you've disbanded or laid off, and you get to hire more. And my hope is that our community and the state and really the whole country rebounds very quickly from this one. That this is a temporary thing, and temporary my hope is that temporary in the shortest way possible. And I am still looking at those rum of yours, Dwayne. Maybe one of these days when you reopen, I get to do that. And we talked about Tanduay rum. Maybe you get to try it. I do want to caution our viewers that I think there's the last morning scoop online that I have, the psychiatrist told us to try and stay away from alcohol at this point. So I do want to just point that one out, especially if you're staying from home and not doing much in the way of going outside. Finally, want to thank our sponsors again. Thank you, everybody. Wash your hands frequently. Don't touch your face. Please stay safe and healthy, and we will get through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.